The Analogue 3D just received its first major firmware patch in 2026, and it makes this N64 system do something with old games that we didn't realize was always there: access a 480p frame buffer. What exactly is that? Well, let's dig into a few old games and see exactly what this hardware emulation machine can now do with N64 games. The 1.2 firmware includes a few interesting upgrades, including support for Nintendo's official wireless N64 controller, as pictured here. I'm not really going into that. I'm focusing on this tweak specifically for games that used to be limited to 480i resolution. We look here at the system menu and we see 480p is available via forced progressive output. To clarify, this only affects about a couple dozen official N64 games that maxed out at 480i resolution, but for those, we now get a full 480p frame buffer. One example here, Excitebike 64, actually doesn't go into progressive scan mode until you go into its menus and toggle it. Doing this, once you're in a race itself, will raise the resolution all the way to 480i on a normal N64. And on the right side here, I have shown that, but 480p as selectable in the Analogue 3D menu unlocks progressive scan, meaning it's taking every single line and showing it at once, instead of doing an interlaced display of them back and forth. So we're going to do a slowed down, zoomed in perspective to show the difference. Right here, progressive scan, 480p, you're seeing pixels, you're seeing blockiness. It's not necessarily the sharpest image you've ever seen in a video game. But what if I told you your old N64 games actually looked worse? Let's take a look now at the original version of Excitebike 64 at 480i, admittedly with the Analogue 3D's weave interlacing model, which is not so great. But here you can see ghosting, you can see shimmering. There is a difference here with the way an N64 originally presented its 480i images and now access to its full 480p frame buffer. Now we move into a whole different game, Castlevania: Legacy of Darkness. If you see these side by side, you might not notice the difference, so we're going to go ahead and slow everything down once again with a zoom. Interlaced on the left, progressive on the right. You will see the ghosting and the shimmer on that left side now that it's slowed down. And the human eye will absolutely see this when it's uncompressed on an Analogue 3D as opposed to a YouTube video. So I will go ahead and show a little bit more of this intro sequence of Castlevania: Legacy of Darkness. This 480p frame buffer is something that arguably you can access if you turn on an N64 emulator, which is doing a lot of other stuff in software that isn't standard with an N64. The Analogue 3D, conversely, is running everything as if it is original hardware. Hardware emulation is a thing that people have debated about for a long time, but the fact that this system is accessing a full frame buffer, essentially double the pixels in one direction, is pretty remarkable stuff that an emulator hasn't been able to enact in a way that really matches the original aesthetic. I've slowed this image down here again because I find the slowdown does a better job of illustrating on something like YouTube what you are getting with interlaced versus progressive. And the fact that we are seeing this really for the first time in a comparable way with all of the official polygon rendering, texture rendering quirks of N64 hardware, as best as Analogue 3D can emulate that via hardware emulation, is quite impressive. It's really interesting to have this side by side in slow motion, because for me, I needed it to really understand why each looked different. Arguably, the 480i looked the tiniest bit smoother at first, but now that I've seen these side by side, I begin to understand that I'm actually getting more pixel information and less of this icky shimmer. And progressive scan in compatible games, as combined with black frame insertion on select compatible TVs, really does look better. We go here now to, I think, another sequence here in Castlevania: Legacy of Darkness that also demonstrates some of the differences that you will notice when you bump up to progressive, and other elements that arguably are less noticeable. Even here with this zoomed in perspective, with this slowed down look at the difference between interlaced and progressive. I understand why someone might look at both and shrug their shoulders at the difference, but it is there, and certainly in this sequence that combines these various skeleton creatures moving around and their sharp pixel information, but also certain motion blur that's attached to their silhouettes moving around, this sort of fire effect that Konami coded in this classic game. It's cool to be able to really look at it this way. And we move on to a different compatible game, that expansion pack enhanced little note right there telling us. But this is actually a problem with Analogue 3D. Notice that flicker just there? That's not you seeing things. There is an issue with Analogue 3D's progressive scan translation that might stumble, I believe, with the resolution changing in different menu sequences. I have another game coming up later that exemplifies this even worse, but this is just a small taste, and I noticed it in quite a few sports games, particularly anything in the All-Star Baseball series from Acclaim back in the day. But once again, I have yet another zoomed in look. Now, this time I turned on Analogue 3D's BVM filter. Essentially, it's a 4K resolution emulation of what a CRT style monitor, in this case a very expensive BVM, might look like. Again, interlaced versus progressive, the idea being that you might think interlaced is more tolerable if there is one of these Analogue 3D filters applied. I still think the 480p looks really good here, so I'm glad I get to show this off as well. And Resident Evil 2 is the game I was hinting to. It exemplifies issues with this progressive scan not working exactly as advertised. This has always been a problem with Resident Evil 2 on N64. Upscalers have struggled with transitions from one resolution to another. This beginning of the game is a great test of it, but that flicker, you're not seeing things. Here it is slowed down at quarter speed. That little bubble right there is the problem, and it happens over and over again and again in Resident Evil 2, and again a few other games as well. Often happens more in the opening menus as opposed to full-on gameplay, but Resident Evil 2 right now is the biggest exception. And since Analogue 3D has called out that this is an experimental feature, that this progressive scan, essentially line doubling for games, even though it works really well for the ones I've shown off thus far and other ones I've tested, is not completely ironclad. Now, 480i support on N64 games is pretty rare. Here, for example, FIFA 99. It wasn't even listed on the box, but I like showing this off as an example of the average gameplay difference of a lot of small things in motion on a bigger screen for the essentially couple dozen games that support it. So if you have an Analogue 3D, you can see the difference. Again, if you've got black frame insertion for your television, that's an even cooler way to access this and enjoy ultimately smoother images on classic N64 games in a more authentic way, in my opinion, than with software emulation. But that's really all I have here today for now. I just wanted to whip something up really quickly, do something a little different than the usual writing and text I do, doing this completely independently. So I appreciate you watching this all the way to the end, and if you'd like more thoughts on N64 games in the future, please hit me in the comments below, or otherwise reach out. sam@samred.com is open at any time. Thank you for watching. Oh, and one more thing. Quickly pointing the selfie camera at myself to say hello. Yes, Mabel also says hello. Appreciate you tuning in and watching me cover the Analogue 3D. I'm trying something different. If you enjoyed it, share with a friend, do any of the YouTube algorithm crap, or even send me a little bit of cash on Venmo. If not, it's fine. Appreciate you. Say bye, Mabel. No.